If you want to get up close and personal with your subject, you're going to need a macro lens. And luckily for you, there are a ton of great options out there to choose from. When checking prices, you can tell that the mirrorless revolution has truly arrived. Lenses that are razor sharp corner to corner cease being sharp enough when they are discontinued or a mirror is removed from a camera. As a result, people have gone from scooping up absolutely incredible deals on F-mount lenses to basically getting them for almost free. I'll start with manual focus film era lenses and give you some background information on the basics of macro photography. Then I'll move on to autofocus models and finish with the specialty lenses. That way you can find a lens that meets your needs. The first thing you need to know is, in addition to calling most of their lenses NIKKOR, and that's all capitalized, Nikon also takes the pedantic naming further by calling their macro lenses micro. So as long as you can look past the naming convention, these lenses can be lots of fun and very useful. Piles of 5.5 centimeter or 55 millimeter f3.5 lenses exist. There are 6 to 10 different versions depending on if you count cosmetic differences. The UV micro lens was designed for scientific purposes. It was to be used with UV light, and they are pretty much impossible to find. All 6 of the versions need a 27.5 millimeter extension tube in order to reach 1:1 magnification. Often, the extension tube is not included with the lens. Being limited to 1:2 or half life-size magnification isn't that big of a deal with a 50 to 60 millimeter lens, as it allows you to focus closer than with a standard lens while still remaining within arm's reach of your subject matter. These lenses can reach 1:1 magnification by using a 27.5 millimeter extension tube, or more likely they had the short barrel nature of the design so that they could be used on a bellows. The 2 bellows I like are the PB4 and the PB6. I favor the PB4 because the front standard can shift. But that's really not super important if you're just getting into macro photography. The real issue is that these lenses are 50 or 60 years old at this point. Many of them have probably never been serviced. These are the lenses that I have most commonly come across that have issues with fungus, haze, oily aperture blades, or dried out helicoid grease. The other thing is that the first 5 versions of these lenses are non-AI. That means that they're not compatible with a lot of the SLRs and most of the DSLR cameras. They can potentially damage the mount of your camera. My video on F-mount lenses covers this in more detail. I want you to get out shooting. That's why my advice is to buy a newer lens. You'll be less likely to run into compatibility issues, and it will be likely in better condition. The next option, which isn't even more expensive, is the Micro-NIKKOR AIS 55mm f2.8. It's better than all of the f3.5s. And Nikon sold this lens for several decades. It was only recently discontinued. Like its predecessors, it does need an extension tube to go to 1:1 macro magnification. So I do think it's a good choice if you need a lens to use on, say, a DSLR, an SLR, and maybe even on a bellows or something like that, where you're going to be using it on multiple systems where things are different. If you want 1x magnification, my recommendation is my favorite macro lens, the Komine made 55mm f2.8. It was sold under several brand names, and the one I currently have is Panagor. It's the best vintage macro lens I've tested at f5.6 with only slight corner softness. At f8 or f11, it's sharp corner to corner. Though that is generally going to be the case with almost all vintage macro lenses. I think it's a great value if you can find it for less than $100. There is also an earlier f3 version, which I would avoid, as it's actually the worst vintage macro lens I've used. The Laowa 60mm f2.8 2x Ultra Macro is an APS-C lens. On a full frame camera, there will be some vignetting at infinity. However, it goes away at macro magnification. That could be worth it because, as the name implies, it goes up to 2x magnification or 2:1 magnification. That means on a full frame camera, it would capture an area the size of a micro four thirds sensor. If you're going to want to do 1:1 magnification or higher, lenses with a longer focal length make sense. The Nikon 105mm f2.8 AI, just like with the 55mm version, you're going to want a non-DSLR reason to want this lens. It needs an extension tube to get to 1x magnification, which makes the whole setup front heavy. I don't think the pricing makes any sense, as the next four lenses are all better than it. Starting with the Vivitar 90mm f2.8, this lens was also made by Komine. This would be a great choice if you can find one that has an F-mount for under $100. More than that, I think you should probably go with a newer autofocus lens. In my experience, all of the vintage macro lenses have very similar optical performance. This one is nice because of how light it is. Then there's the Vivitar 100mm f2.8, which gets overshadowed by the A Dine 105mm f2.8 lens, which is my favorite rebranded lens. That's because despite the 5mm of difference in focal length, they're actually the same lens. That was made by Kiron Precision, which also released a version under their Kiron brand as a 105mm. A Dine invented the ring flash, which was initially used for dental photos, which explains the interesting distance scale on the lens. Tokina, also not wanting to be left out, made a Vivitar lens, the Vivitar 90mm f2.8 Series 1 VMC, along with the Tokina AT-X 90mm f2.5, were both designed to use a teleconverter to reach 1:1 magnification. I just like that type of design because it is often more expensive than comparable lenses while being heavier and handling worse. If you want more than life-size magnification, there is the Venus Laowa 100mm f2.8 2x Ultra Macro APO. This lens goes up to 2x magnification without needing an extension tube, which is absolutely awesome. The only downside is that it does not have CPU contacts, so you're not going to get XF data. And you do want to pay attention when you go looking for this lens, as it was sold in multiple camera mounts. So that can make finding a used copy of the lens difficult. The first autofocus lens is, of course, the AF Micro-NIKKOR 55mm f2.8. This is not a lens that I've come across, and I didn't know it existed before I started looking stuff up for this video. The lens does not have a limit switch, and that can cause quite a delay if you miss focus. You're going to really hear that in-body focus motor whirling away. I don't think it's a very good value compared to the AF Micro-NIKKOR 60mm f2.8D. And the first thing of note about this lens is it does have a larger focus ring. With the copies I've had, the ring to switch from manual to autofocus has been a bit tight and awkward to switch. The limit switch is a desirable feature to have, as it will limit the autofocus depending on where the lens is currently focused. At a short focus distance, the lens will be restricted to focusing from 30 to 22 centimeters. At a longer distance, it will be limited to 30 centimeters to infinity. This helps improve autofocus speed because if it misses and the lens racks all the way to either infinity or 1x macro magnification, that can take quite a long time. The big improvement the AFS Micro-NIKKOR 60mm f2.8 GED brings is internal focusing. That means that the front element of the lens is not going to extend when the lens focuses, and this brings about another benefit of greatly increased working distance. My only issue is that for less than $100 more, you get VR and weather resistance in the 105 f2.8G. But before that, the first Nikon in the telephoto range is going to be the Micro-NIKKOR 105mm f2.8D. The price on these lenses can be pretty incredible. What's nice is that it has a limit switch and it's going to be backwards compatible with Nikon SLR film cameras. I don't particularly care about autofocus with macro lenses, and so I prefer the focus ring on some of the lenses that I'm going to talk about later rather than this one. Then the best lens, especially if you're going to be doing macro outdoors, is going to be the AFS Micro-NIKKOR 105mm f2.8G IF ED VR. It's got all the best tech that Nikon had at the time, with the advantage over the 60mm 2.8G being the weather resistance and vibration reduction. The vibration reduction is especially helpful because of the longer focal length. Tamron made 7 different autofocus macro lenses. There's a link to Tamron's page which includes information on all of their discontinued lenses. The ones I'm going to focus on are going to be some of the later ones. In particular, I had the first version of the SP-AF 90mm f2.8 DI macro, the 272E version of the lens. I like this lens and you can still find great deals on them, but it's probably beaten in terms of image quality by the more expensive and harder to find Tokina lenses. The last two are also interesting. The SP 90mm f2.8 DI macro 1:1 VC USD, and that has a model number of F004. It has internal focus and the USD stands for ultrasonic silent drive motor. Additionally, it has vibration compensation, VC, which is Tamron's version of optical image stabilization. That lens was then topped by the SP 90mm f2.8 DI macro 1:1 VC USD model number F017, which, in addition to having all the previously mentioned features, is weather resistant. This is the only real competition to the Nikon 105mm 2.8G. I would make my decision between these two lenses based on how good of a deal I could find on either of them. If you're just after image quality, the Tokina AT-X Pro 100mm f2.8D or its replacement, the AT-X-I 100mm f2.8, are both good alternatives. Both of them have focus clutches, which is a favorite feature of mine, in addition to their great reputations for image quality. If you're into tripods, there's a few lenses that are perfect for you, the first being the Micro-NIKKOR 200mm f4 AIS. This was the world's first 200mm macro lens. It's big and heavy, which is why it should come with a tripod collar. Like other Nikon AIS lenses, you'll need an extension tube to get to 1:1 magnification. Keep in mind that it is a buyer's market for this lens, so make sure you get a good deal on it. The AF Micro-NIKKOR 200mm f4D IFED is the updated version that was released in 1993. It is big and heavy, but it can also reach 1:1 magnification on its own. It is still an expensive lens. While it wouldn't be my first choice for a macro lens, there are a lot of situations where this is going to be the best lens. There's also a Tamron 180mm f3.5 SP-AF-DI macro B01. This lens was released in 2003. It's a fraction of the price and lighter than the Nikon. There aren't a ton of F-mount versions of this lens out there, so you might have to be patient to find a copy. There is a UV macro lens that is actually available. It's the UV-NIKKOR 105mm f4.5. Now, just because it's available doesn't mean it's cheap. This is the most expensive macro lens that made it into this video. The PC-E Micro-NIKKOR 45mm f2.8D and PC-E Micro-NIKKOR 85mm f2.8D are both perspective control lenses with tilt shift functionality. They are both able to go up to 1:2 magnification. There is a third tilt shift lens, a 24mm. It does not have any macro functionality. Both of these lenses are expensive, as Nikon has not yet released updated Z-mount versions. In line with those, Venus Laowa has a 15mm f4 1:1 macro shift lens. This lens is going to create a very interesting perspective. As such, you're going to have a very hard time finding used copies. Then there's a 25mm f14 macro probe lens. The probe part of this lens is waterproof, so it can be put into liquid. Shots from this lens are instantly recognizable. And the last Laowa lens is a 25mm f2.8 2.5 to 5x ultra macro lens. It outdoes everything previously mentioned with the ability to get to 5x magnification on its own. To get to a higher magnification than that, you're either going to need a larger or custom setup. It's such a cool lens. And that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you in the next one.